Hello everybody, good evening. I'm Cosmic Claire and welcome to another one of my evening video blogs from a headingly worthy of Carathras, which anybody familiar with The Lord of the Rings will probably know is a mountain famed for its heavy snow. Well, sorry to carry on with the... well, no, I'm not apologising, actually. I'm very happy to have been kind of having a bit of a Tolkien thread going on in the background here for the last week or three. And today, I just finished this absolutely wonderful book about Tolkien and the influence the First World War had on him. And there we are, and you can actually see him. He's the chap with the... that's a picture of him at his Oxford college, just before the First World War broke out, and that's him. That was him holding his arm out against the tree, standing at the back. Now, I thought that for a change, I'd just read some bits out, because this book is so absolutely marvellous. And if what John Garth attributes to or interprets the ideas of Tolkien as being, if they are not roughly what Tolkien actually intended, or what he might have eventually realised, it was about, well, if that's the case, then John Garth is something of a kind of genius to have kind of invented all this stuff himself. But I do think it comes from Tolkien. And I've just got a couple of pages here with a few sort of passages I'd like to read out, because was talk after the war with produced what was called a disenchanted view, and he talks here about the metaphorical uses of disenchanted and disillusioned, and the difference from the literal meaning, but this brings us to a very, very important point of moral ethics. And it says here, Tolkien stands against disenchantment in both its literal and metaphorical senses. The disenchanted view, Garth says, the disenchanted view, metaphorically speaking, is that failure renders effort meaningless. This is a nihilist position that Tolkien obviously is rejecting completely. Tolkien's protagonists are heroes, not because of their successes, which may be limited, but because of their courage and tenacity in trying. By implication, worth cannot be measured by results alone, but is intrinsic. Then, a bit later on, he says that no one has argued more energetically than Tolkien that a tree is more than a source of wood. According to one of his works, the world is actually a spell in progress, a work of enchantment, etymologically a magic that is sung. And then he goes on to talk about one of Tolkien's ill-fated heroes, Turin Turambar. Fate may laugh at his efforts, because he seems to be dogged by a bad fate. Fate may laugh at his efforts, but he refuses to be humbled. Then, a quote from somebody in the First World War. With our backs to the wall and believing in the justice of our cause, each one of us must fight on to the end. And then the the last one I'll read out is from a war writer, a writer about the First World War, Charles Dewey. Perhaps someday later generations may begin to see our war in a truer perspective and may discern it as an inevitable step in the tragic process by which consciousness has informed the will of man. This is what I've always been going on about, isn't it? By which consciousness has informed the will of man, by which in time all things will be fashioned fair. So what what they're saying about the First World War, that it was a kind of test of the soul. That Tolkien is saying that that it's just a matter of straightforwardly refusing to be brought down by whatever might happen, even though we may be brought down physically. It's the moral survival which is really what is important. And I know, well, I've been having a kind of long off screen debate discussion with a dear old friend of mine who is not convinced of a metaphysical reality or of the existence of consciousness, other than as some kind of epiphenomenon, which is the kind of mainstream scientific view. I think, forgive me if I'm misrepresenting this. This is kind of as far as I'm understanding it so far. And I don't want to get back. I don't want to get into like a contradictory thing, because on the other hand, this discussion is kind of informing and affecting my train of thought that I'm responding to I'm talking about in these blogs. But I think it's just so important that even within terms of conventional psychology, that we don't create a self-fulfilling prophecy for ourselves, or actually that we do create a self-fulfilling prophecy for ourselves, but it's a self-fulfilling prophecy which has positive results, rather than a self-fulfilling prophecy which has negative results. Because if we say, like that quote, that failure will make trying useless, then you're already getting into a kind of mindset where you're thinking, oh, well, you know, we failed before, what's the point, you know? And so you never go forward. It becomes what you might call the kind of the fractal of our reality. And I'm finding myself thinking about so many situations in the past where I've myself, I admit that I've created bad energy between people, between myself and other people, because I've kind of expected them to be taking the first step to generosity or forgiveness or whatever. And if we're always on the back foot with the universe, expecting, you know, well, why should I, and what's the point, and all this kind of stuff, then at an interpersonal level, you're kind of encouraging that as a feedback from other people. Whereas if one is generous and takes risk and gives positive psychic energy to other people, then without regard to what the response might be, then that is, in its own way, kind of heroic. And we've been kind of tamed by bureaucrats who are only interested in the kind of profit and loss sheet of personal gain, rather than I can't help, you know, thinking about kind of Celtic heroes who would, you know, go into battle to save their clan with no, well, obviously, probably, you know, they don't want to die, but it's like, well, that is not the issue. I mean, there have been so many, you know, we get this situation in our modern culture with like health and safety, and I can't remember when it was, but some while ago, I heard a story about some child was drowning in a lake, and think somebody went and tried to rescue her and ended up drowning themselves. And then there was a comment by police or some public figure afterwards which said, oh, well, you know, this person shouldn't have tried to go and rescue the child because look what happened. And I think this is completely, it's completely losing touch with human values. This is the profit and loss sheet of human relations. That person died a hero, and certainly the Klingons would have appreciated them. And can you imagine what it would be like living with yourself? Think, oh, I let that little child drown. I just stood there and watched that little child drown. And I thought, oh, I'd better not go in there because I might drown myself. And then we'd both be lost. So it's a matter of what level you want to take these things at. And you know, the ancient Greeks and the people who kind of left us the mythologies that still hold deep values would have written songs. You know, Homer would have written, you know, hundreds of lines about the heroic nature of this person and how he would have gone to the Elysian fields, and, you know, Apollo would have, you know, clapped him on the back and said, what a good chap you are, you know. But in our modern world, heroism is not important. I came across a marvellous phrase last year, a sentence. I can't remember who wrote it, unfortunately, but some people might know it. And it goes, the hero needs not be undefeated, only undaunted. The hero needs not be undefeated, only undaunted. And this is a view of humanity which takes us beyond the narrow limits of economic profit and loss, and shows us what is truly of value. It's the human spirit. The human spirit has intrinsic value in its own right, and ultimately it is better to go down fighting. In fact, I've just been listening to a Neil Young track. Better to burn out than fade away. Well, maybe not like, you know, some rock stars or something, but, you know, in a heroic way, it is, it gives some kind of meaning to your life, rather than the alternative, which is cowering before the bureaucratic conformity that is being sold to us under the pretense of health and safety and political correctness, and every single decent value and virtue that has been historically and traditionally held by all cultures is now steadily being attacked and often eroded away by the bureaucratic elite who want to and are having some success at enslaving people. And you can only enslave people who have no will for freedom. In our ancient past, every day was a heroic struggle against the elements, wild animals, and for survival. And today, it's been turned into, life has been turned into a thin gruel, which is given out in a ration like the Oliver Twist's workhouse. And that last comment about seeing all this as a great play of consciousness, whereby we will see that this has all had some meaning for the awakening of our consciousness, to see how narrow and confined we've been. And we will look back, and it will be a joyous and wonderful thing to see the awakening of how we stepped out of the straitjacket of conformity to bureaucracy and the prison of the mind that has been so cunningly fabricated around us. So that's kind of the thing I'm onto tonight, folks. Think of your life in heroic terms, and don't be afraid of the constrictions that are put upon us. If you see something wrong, if you see some child dying, don't be afraid of the consequences of doing it. Be afraid of the consequences of not doing it. Be afraid of the consequences of living with yourself, of not having done what you knew was right in your soul. Be heroic. Okay, well, that's my message for this evening, folks. Thank you for watching, and I'll be with you again tomorrow. So I'll say, in Lakesh. Hello everybody, good evening. I'm Cosmic Claire, and welcome to another one of my evening video blogs from a headingly worthy of Carathras, which anybody familiar with The Lord of the Rings will probably know is a mountain famed for its heavy snow. We are, and you can actually see him. He's the chap with the. That's a picture of him at his Oxford college just before the war, the First World War broke out, and that's him. That was him holding his arm out against the tree, standing at the back. Now, I thought that for a change, I'd just read some bits out, because this book is so absolutely marvellous. And if what John Garth attributes to or interprets the ideas of Tolkien as being, if they are not roughly what Tolkien actually intended, or what he might have eventually realised, it was about. Well, if that's the case, then John Garth is something of a kind of genius to have kind of invented all this stuff himself. But I do think it comes from Tolkien. And, well, sorry to carry on with the... well, no, I'm not apologising, actually. I'm very happy to have been kind of having a bit of a Tolkien thread going on in the background here for the last week or three. And today, I just finished this absolutely wonderful book about Tolkien and the influence the First World War had on him. And there